Hi, I'm Brenda Huetner. I am a NASA Solar System Ambassador, and I'm here today to talk to you about OSIRIS REx, the asteroid sample return mission headed up right here in Tucson at the University of Arizona. OSIRIS REx plans to go to an asteroid orbit and study the asteroid itself and the way it moves through space, then capture a sample of the regolith, that's the surface materials, and bring it on back to Earth for further study. Why Bennu? Well, it's the right location. So most asteroids are out beyond Mars. This particular one comes in close enough to Earth that it will be relatively easy to get to and get home from. The green is Bennu, the blue is Earth. It's also the right size. If it's about 510 meters, if it were bigger, we wouldn't be able to map all of it, maybe. If it were smaller, maybe we wouldn't be able to stay in orbit, which is what we need to do if we're going to hang out there for a couple years. Here's the overall plan. You can see it started in 2010 with some of the initial proposal phases. We are currently in phase E, which we'll talk about in more detail in a minute. The initial phases were for the design of the spacecraft. So here is a photo in comparison to a human on the right. The tiny dot in the middle of the slide is the OSIRIS REx relative size to Bennu. It's, as you can see, quite small. Here's some of the instrumentation on the spacecraft. Mostly these are the cameras and spectrometers. REx is a spectrometer. The ones that say cam are other types of cameras. The other spectrometers all start with O. There's a thermal, there's an infrared. OLA is the laser altimeter. And this arm that sticks out from the side is the TAGSAM, that's touch and go sample acquisition mechanism. And that's the piece that will actually do the collection of the regolith. Here's how it works. So this is a cutaway view. You saw from the other picture, it's really a circular collector head. And what happens is, as it drops to the surface, it touches very briefly. We shoot nitrogen out. The little flaps open. The nitrogen forces the regolith into the collection tubes. The flaps seal close. We back away slowly and come home safely, in theory. Here's a picture of the spacecraft. This was at Lockheed Martin, where it was built. Here it is again with the solar panels folded up, and we need to be able to fold up the solar panels, although they'll be extended for the duration of the mission, so that it fits into the payload fairing, which is this piece right here. The payload fairing sits on the top of the rocket and is the piece that contains the actual spacecraft. Is a picture of the launch, which I got to see. It was fabulous. If you ever get a chance to watch a launch, I highly recommend it. And that launch is this big yellow line right down the center of the slide. The next phase, the longest phase, phase E, is the asteroid operations that includes both the outbound and return flights. So here's a little bit more of detail on the asteroid operations. As you can see, it's partly getting there, checking things out. The middle area is where we investigated all the possible sites to potentially collect a sample. And then the later part is the actual sample acquisition, which happened October 20th. But here's the approach. As you can see, we had a pretty good idea of the general shape of the asteroid. We did not expect it to be quite so rocky, though. Look in here, this is a composite of other photos taken in November. you can see boulders everywhere. And if you look down at that bottom hemisphere there, the giant one that's coming around in a minute is actually 98 feet tall. That's like a 7-story building. These boulders are huge and they cover the entire surface. We actually learned a couple of other kind of interesting things too, just from watching this asteroid. For one thing, there is a particle ejection event regularly, which is where little pebbles get ejected from the surface of Bennu, and sometimes they fall right back to the surface, sometimes they orbit the asteroid for a couple days, sometimes they just fly off into space. We don't exactly know why. Could be thermal fractures if the asteroid heats up on one side and is cool on the other. It could cause cracks. Could be little impacts from meteoroids or something, or maybe a combination. Don't know. We also see a couple of pieces of rock that look like they probably came off Vesta, which is one of the largest objects in the asteroid belt. The spectrometer, you can see just with your eye, it's a much lighter, different color, much brighter than the rest of Bennu, and that's the vision that matches Vesta. These particular ones are between 5 and 14 feet across, just to give you a feel for the size and scale. But the main event is TAG, that's the touch and go operations. And the plan here has always been to leave orbit, come close to the surface, touch just very briefly, gather up the material, and then head back into orbit where we will check to make sure we got enough material. I believe we promised 60 grams. And then from there, if we need to go back and get more, we can. Here's the sample site where they were going to collect. The orange line here represents the original plan. They thought they'd have a nice big wide field of a nice flat sandy surface, but no, it's a much rockier boulder covered surface, and the blue is considered the safe area that they can touch down. It's pretty tricky navigation to get in between these boulders without hitting the spacecraft either on descent or while backing away. So here is the actual sample collection. Magical. Let's watch it again. Fabulous. So here is a photo that was taken a couple days later of the sample collection head. This, you can see there's still particles all floating around there, and what they think happened is the collection head did its job. It did a great job, but a piece of something, some larger bit of rock, got stuck in where that flap is that's supposed to come down and seal it, which means that every time they move the collection head around, more bits of regolith sort of get tossed about and actually tossed out of the collection head. So in the way these things work, they had to regroup and decided to not stop and measure. It looks like we got lots and lots of material, but instead to put the sample directly into the sample return capsule so it will be locked in safely and stop losing these little bits all over by leaving the head out too long. So here's the closing of the sample return capsule, and boom, it's lovely. No little rocks in the way, no problems disconnecting the collection arm. The sample material is inside, safe and ready to go. So what happens next? Well, next is we get ready for the return cruise. That's the purple block here. That's a 2 and something year flight back. The window for bringing the spacecraft home opens in March of next year, March of 2021. The plan is to have the spacecraft home here on Earth in September of 2023. So it'll be a couple months before we actually begin that return cruise. And then phase F, the last phase, it says here 2 years or so, but it will probably go on for decades after that as people continue to study the sample that we bring back. I'm going to leave you with one more video that sort of summarizes the tag team experience. And that's OSIRIS REx as much as I know as of today. You want to learn more? You can go to asteroidmission.org where they keep a blog and all these photos and videos and much more are available if you want to look at them. They also have a Facebook page and a Twitter account at OSIRIS REx. And if you want to learn more, they will be posting findings as they happen, as we learn more from Bennu. Thank you very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of the event.